Alright, what's up, guys? So, today I want to talk to you about the Twilight films. I really liked the first Twilight film. I thought it was a beautiful love story about a girl who goes to a new school, meets a guy she likes, finds out he's a vampire, they fall in love. I love the scene where the car is racing towards her and Edward blocks it. It's a feat of strength, and, Edward would do anything to protect Bella. This guy would die for her. So, I really like the first Twilight film. Robert Pattinson nails the role of Edward Cullen. Just looking at him, he looks like a vampire. He's got the brown hair, the pale skin, the great jawline going on. Robert Pattinson gives an amazing performance as Edward Cullen, and I liked him in this film. I know a lot of girls might like him. I'm a guy, I'm not gonna like him the way a girl likes him, but I believe he gave a strong performance, and I liked him as Edward Cullen. Kristen Stewart as Bella Swan was pretty good. She played the kind of quiet and nerdier role good. And I will say that I believe that Edward and Bella look good together. Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart had great chemistry on screen, and they look good together. They both had that brownish red hair. They were both tall and slim. They had the pale skin. They both had the great jawline. I think they look good together. Watching the film, looking at the poster, Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart look good together, and I feel like that really helped the film too from a visual standpoint. But yeah, I like the first Twilight film. I like the few moments that they had. I like when they went running in the forest. I like the baseball scene, and where Edward has to protect her. This guy would do anything for her, and it was a great love story, and they both gave strong performances. As far as Twilight New Moon goes, we see Edward in the first act and the third act. So it's kind of like when you're watching the second act of the film, you're like, where'd Edward go? Is he going to come back? But when Edward leaves, I kind of like the scene where he leaves and he tells Bella, Edward tells Bella, forget about me. It will be as if I never existed. That scene kind of hit me. I don't really watch a lot of romance films, but I like that scene, and I felt like it worked. It was very emotional. When Edward leaves, Taylor Lautner takes over. He plays Jacob the Wolf. I feel like Taylor Lautner is a good actor, but I feel like he doesn't have as much charisma compared to Robert Pattinson. I'm not hating on Taylor Lautner. I'm just saying that I feel like Robert Pattinson is a stronger actor than Taylor Lautner and has more charisma. So when Edward kind of leaves in the second act of the film, I feel like the film kind of slows down with the whole kind of romance going on between Jacob and Bella, but when Edward does return in the third act, he steals the show, when he's wearing the robe and the diamonds start shining. So I feel like, yeah, that was my issue with New Moon. It kind of slowed down in the second act. I feel like Edward and Bella, Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart were better together. As far as Twilight Eclipse goes, there are moments I liked in this film, when they were on the mountain and it was cold, and then Edward had the cold body and Jacob had the heat. I think it kind of helped build tension that Jacob and Bella might end up together. But then again, I still felt like Bella and Edward make a better couple. So I'd say that Eclipse might be I think one of the weaker films. It kind of has more to do with the love triangle. They really expanded on New Moon. But I feel like, when we get to the film after that, Breaking Dawn Part 1, the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 1, I really like this film because it just brings everything to a close now. Bella and Edward get married, they go on their honeymoon. Finally, they've been building this since the first film. Edward and Bella are married, they're together now. They go on a honeymoon, and the film is basically that. It's a long honeymoon, it's a 1 hour and a half, 2 hour honeymoon, and it didn't have a lot of action like the other Twilight films, but I like the love story here. I like that they're finally together. It's looking like a happy ending. And then we find out that, spoilers, Bella is pregnant with Edward's baby, and her body can't, her body's gonna get weak from this. It might kill her. But she does give birth to the baby, and Bella dies at the end. And Edward bites her, her eyes open, she turns into a vampire. So this leads us into the final Twilight film, the end of the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2, where we see now Bella is a vampire. She has vampire powers, but she's able to control the bloodlust a little better. We see Edward and Bella together as vampires with their baby, Renesmee. And I really like Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2. There's this big war between the vampires and the evil vampires at the end. The people from New Moon. And I feel like the third act fight here, Taylor Lautner joins in. He helps them. Jacob helps them. So we got Bella, Edward, Jacob, and their vampire army fighting off these guys. So at the end of the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2, we see Bella, Edward, and Jacob and the rest of the vampires fighting off the Volturi at the end of Breaking Dawn Part 2. And that battle was pretty epic. You know, the scale was massive. You know, it was the final Twilight film, so they went all out. We see Taylor Lautner, who plays Jacob, you know, fighting alongside them. So I like the battle at the end of Breaking Dawn Part 2. It was a big action spectacle. You know, I like that Bella became a vampire in Breaking Dawn Part 2, and it was pretty cool to watch her and Edward like say that, you know, they'll spend eternity together and she can run like as fast as him. So I thought it was a beautiful conclusion to the Twilight Saga. I like the Twilight films. I like all of them. I might say my favorite Twilight films are the first Twilight film because it's the original high school romance, you know, of Bella and Edward coming together. I like the blue cinematography. I liked Robert Pattinson's performance as Edward Cullen. I liked Kristen Stewart as Bella Swan. So I'd say Twilight, the first one, is my favorite. And then I'd say maybe Breaking Dawn Part 1 or Part 2, like after that. You know, I like that in Breaking Dawn Part 1, they get married and, you know, they finally get to be together and settle down. Then in Breaking Dawn Part 2, Kristen Stewart's Bella Swan becomes the vampire. So I thought it was a great conclusion. So I'd say like my top 3 Twilight films are Twilight, then Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1, then Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2, or flip those around, I'm not sure, but those are my top 3 Twilight films. I'd say my least favorite is probably either Eclipse or New Moon. But yeah, I like the Twilight films. If you guys haven't seen them, check them out. If you have seen them, let me know what you think down in the comment section down below. As always guys, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.